serious, what is your take on the new federal rule stating that non-competes are now unenforceable? It's fantastic, and one more shackle off the American worker. The next fall has to be employer-supplied health insurance. The main reason the non-competes even exist is so they can pay employees who have access to proprietary data less than they should. If you have an employee who has integral knowledge of your system and business practices, you're supposed to pay them a wage that encourages them to stay with your company. Instead, they made the employee sign a non-compete. I'm so glad this bullshit is going away. I live in California, where this has been the law since the 19th century. On over the mid-Boston area is the center of the reach industry, in no small part because of that rule. Much easier to branch out and start something new if your old boss doesn't still own your skills. Doesn't directly affect me, but it's about time the rest of the country catches up. And it's yet another way that Democrats and Republicans are not the same, and that Joe Biden has way overperformed expectations. It's overall a good thing given the number of people I know who thought they were bound by a ridiculous NC at one point or another. Several times I've had long conversations convincing people that your employer has no real hope to buy you from working in your field. That said, silly NCs used to be a great way to weed out bad employers. It was like they were raising their hands to say, hey, before you take this job, just so you know, we're clueless and shitty. Good riddance. I've seen companies make non-compete for jobs they had no business making non-competes for. Personal trainers sign a non-compete, meaning they could not work as a trainer or fitness instructor in any other gym, both during their employment at the university gym and for 6 months afterwards. Then they were shocked when most of their training staff quit. A whole bunch of morons for a university fitness center. It should have happened a long time ago. My old boss tried to make it to where I couldn't work in IT support for 10 years in our state and all the states bordering our state. All they were really used for was to keep pay low and abuse employees. If you don't want an employee to leave, fucking take care of them with pay raises, a generous PTO package, none of this bullshit, unlimited PTO, and a good work-life balance. I'll accept a non-compete agreement when the company accepts a non-termination agreement. A business cannot take away your right to find another job without first guaranteeing that job, and since they seem entirely unwilling to do that, instead simply laying off mass amounts of workers whenever their executives need a boost to their bonus for that quarter, I'm real glad the FTC told N to F off. I'm a musician. A company that had me as a seasonal high tried to make me sign a 3-year non-compete clause for a gig that paid maybe $2,000. I crossed it out before signing it, but it's outrageous what companies think they should be able to get away with. My state has had legislation that makes non-competes illegal since 2019. I'm actually surprised the federal government caught up so quickly. The real onus should be simply that with ANC comes an employment contract that pays you in full for the length of the non-compete term, with all ancillary benefits included. If you don't want me to work, then pay me. This clause is used to stifle competition in the workforce. And yet one more example of US free market capitalism not adhering to free market principles. Non-compete agreements can make sense in some very limited situations. If businesses had kept non-compete agreements exclusively for those specific situations, they wouldn't be banned. However, businesses wanted to use it as an employee retention tool instead of as a tool to protect actual trade secrets. They abused their tool, so it gets taken away. Abject ignorant abuse of power and usurper of freedom 0, sanity 1. SE of power, or a whacked-out legal counsel. Employees working in non-trust or even proprietary work should be limited in any way from leaving a firm and seeking other employment within the field. The last non-compete I dealt with was after working for a large construction firm for several years. They asked me to sign a non-compete and I actually laughed. When they reiterated the request for me to sign, I said if they paid me $20,000 on the spot I'd sign it. They never brought it up again. I expect a lot of movement on the upper range of the salary positions. At the same time, those positions won't be paid what they have been. At that level, people get paid to have themselves locked in under a contract. If no one has that ability, you're likely to see more job hopping. Ultimately, I don't know what effect it will have. Companies may still work together silently and force non-competes with each other. We won't poach from you if you don't poach from us kind of thing. However, outside of big firms in tech or finance, it will probably go away altogether. Absolutely love it. I work in a rather niche industry, so non-compete clause would completely screw me for the set amount of time until I could work in the industry again. But that's usually the point of non-compete clauses. To screw an employee for having the gall to leave. Honestly, I'll have to see how it impacts my position. Had I kind of liked that my company would pay me a large portion of my salary if I got a new job for 6 months, essentially got a paid sabbatical if I left. So little bun to give a counterside to everyone else. I see nothing wrong with it. My last job tried to get me to sign one, and I refused. I knew they were planning on laying me off, and there's worded to the extent of any skill I used while there could not be used elsewhere for 2 years. I worked in DevOps and IT. I think it's great. But I was under the impression non-compete clauses were largely unenforceable in the vast majority of cases already. Codifying it will protect people from being bullied by shitty bosses, which is the main benefit for most people. The harm done to employees by non-competes is likely to be far greater than the harm done to employers by former employees. Of course, some employers are damaged when an employee leaves. On the other hand, ALL employees are harmed by non-competes. I'm complaining that they can no longer substitute non-compete agreements for trying to make people actually want to keep working at your company. You brought this on yourself. Now go fuck yourselves. They were illegal and unenforceable in many jurisdictions. I enjoy negotiating contracts with them because I would sometimes get concessions from employers in exchange for leaving them in despite being worthless. While it's a positive step, in the end it's moot. Chamber of Commerce will sue. Supreme Court will overturn it. Rinse and repeat for everything that helps regular people instead of corporations. I think it's great. I never liked these silly non-compete agreements anyway, and my understanding is in a lot of places they weren't enforceable to begin with. Good riddance to bad rubbish. I'm just shocked our government is doing something positive also. This is amazing. While I never had to worry, I had a lot of peers that were kinda stuck because of non-competes. Interested to see what SCOTUS will do with this, as it's certainly going to be challenged. Personally, I think reasonably restricted non-competes aren't the end of the world. This rule will eventually be struck down in the current pro-business Supreme Court because that's what they are being so well paid to do by big business. Good ruling. I had to sign one about 15 years ago. Stopped me from changing companies for more money. I was paid well, but could have done better. It's great. It also shows the difference between Republicans and Democrats, just in case you needed more evidence of a difference. Thank God. It's about time. It's absurd that an employer can dictate what other jobs you're allowed to take or not. The Supreme Court, as it is, will strike it down, and probably a bunch of other FTC worker protections with it. I think rules aren't laws, and random admin agencies don't get to write laws. Congress writes laws. I always signed them. No one ever enforced them. Glad it's 100 now. But it always felt like 100. Kid. Non-competes were historically used to abuse the working class. So I'm glad they are dead. What's the source of this law? And why would a federal law dictate contract law? It's like making a rule that people need to breathe. I think like, yeah, we know. Treat employees at least fairly, and the non-compete becomes a non-issue. 100 agree with it. At will employment should mean entirely at will. Good. Now do forced arbitration agreements in employment contracts. I'm on board with anything that stacks that deck against employers. Most current non-competes are broken when taken to court already. I'm amazing it wasn't killed off by bribes or lobbying. Effing fantastic. 9 out of 10 non-competes are abusive.